This is a photo of Adam Ayad of the Dheisheh refugee camp in Bethlehem. He was shot in the chest during an Israeli raid.
So I'll speak about Saudi Arabia and how they've been using lies and deception to gaslight the international community with promises of reforms.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We start with an Israeli bulldozer knocking down a Palestinian home in Massafer Yatta. The Israelis intend to do this in the whole area, making 1,000 families homeless. This is a photo of Adam Ayad of the Dheisheh refugee camp in Bethlehem. He was shot in the chest during an Israeli raid of the camp. Haaretz reported that the army claims he threw a Molotov cocktail. He was 15, barely a teenager. Now his life is over. Israel pretends to be a democracy, but do you know that Israel has a military unit made up of soldiers from just one Jewish religious sect? A year ago, this American citizen, Omar Abdelmajid Assad, was detained, tied up, gagged, and left to die after an apparent heart attack. The unit that detained him, perhaps out of boredom, is called Netzach Yehuda, which translates into Judah's Eternity Battalion. Haaretz says that this group has been recently transferred to the Golan, which is occupied Syria. To keep the battalion pure, all women soldiers in the area were transferred out, even including women officers. Druze soldiers who were cooks in the area were also transferred out. Evidently, they're not considered worthy or safe enough to cook the meals for the Haredi soldiers. Your tax dollars at work, $4.3 billion last year. This is Yariv Levin. He's Netanyahu's new justice minister. Levin is getting to work right away. He'll introduce a law to essentially overthrow Israel's high court. The law would allow Israel's parliament, its Knesset, with a simple majority to overrule decisions of that Supreme Court. That would mean the ruling coalition could do whatever it wants to Palestinians, to Druze, to non-Orthodox Jews, and it would all be legal. That's how they do things in the only democracy in the Middle East. Two encouraging signs of the times. At the Jewish website, Forward, there is a quote from a conservative rabbi, Jeremy Kalmanovsky, who has a synagogue in Manhattan. He says he'll no longer say the prayer wishing for success of the Israeli government. That's done in most synagogues in the U.S. The news site Forward reports that he says, "I don't hope that this government succeeds. I hope this government falls and is replaced by a better one. I just could not imagine us saying this prayer that their efforts be successful. I think their efforts are dastardly." And this headline in Haaretz from one of their young columnists, Ofri Ilani, "Why I'm turning my back on my Jewish identity." He's so appalled by what the government has been doing, he's not going to celebrate the Jewish holidays and customs anymore. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu telephoned Ukrainian President Zelensky and asked him to vote against a measure at the UN General Assembly calling on the International Court of Justice to issue an opinion on Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. Zelensky then told his UN representative not to attend the session. So a simple phone call got Zelensky to bend somewhat to Netanyahu's will. What did Zelensky get for all this? Nothing. Less than nothing. Israeli journalist Barak Ravid reports Netanyahu's government is hinting that it's going to go in a pro-Putin direction. Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, in his first speech, said that he'll speak on January 3rd to Putin's Foreign Minister Lavrov. He also said he won't be talking about Russia and Ukraine in public. An editorial in Haaretz on January 2nd was entitled "Let Ukrainians Work." It noted that Ukrainians who managed to get to Israel have restricted employment rights. Those coming before October 1st were only allowed to work in 17 cities in Israel and only in fields of hospitality, construction, agriculture, and institutional nursing. In other words, in low-level blue-collar jobs. Ukrainian citizens who have arrived in Israel after October 1st will not be allowed to work at all. The editorial said that these people face starvation. By the way, when I say Ukrainian, I mean non-Jewish Ukrainians. Jewish Ukrainians are allowed to apply for citizenship immediately and work anywhere they can get a job. Why Zelensky puts up with this, one can only speculate and criticize. Background on a speaker at the Sunday, January 8th, Ukrainian Socialist Solidarity Campaign's meeting. Back in November, late November, Svitlana Romanko, a Ukrainian climate activist, was removed from a Russian-sponsored meeting at the COP27 climate conference. Democracy Now! Made a report.
A prominent Ukrainian climate activist and environmental lawyer has been suspended from the UN climate talks after she and others disrupted a Russian event here inside COP27. During the event, Svitlana Romanko and others accused Russia of committing war crimes in Ukraine. That's Svitlana Romanko and the other activists removed from the event, then had their COP27 badges suspended. Svitlana has since left Egypt over fears for her safety following the incident. She's joining us now. She founded the Stand With Ukraine campaign and Raison, We Stand. We last spoke to her in April, shortly after she co-wrote an article with Bill McKibben headlined "The Ukraine War is a Decision Point. Banks should stop funding the fossil fuel industry forever." Svitlana Romanko, welcome back to Democracy Now! We're going to go to this protest in a minute, but a quick thought on our first segment. The joining together of the issue of climate justice and human rights with the long-time imprisonment of Alaa Abdel Fattah and the demand for his freedom that has so reverberated throughout this summit.
Hello, Emias. Thank you so much for having me here again with Democracy Now! And truly, while our treatment in Explosion and event at COP27 that tried to give some legitimacy to the murderous Russian regime is appalling, we also think of other activists today, earlier, and also activists in Uganda and Tanzania who were multiple times detained for the ECOP opposition, and also Mozambique and across African countries and in many other countries where dictatorships are alive and well. And they all are locked in prison for speaking out. And people must have the right to stand up and speak out for freedom, democracy, and climate justice.
Svitlana Romanko, can you talk about the protests that you engaged in here that had you thrown out of the UN Climate Summit and why you chose to do that? You're a longtime climate activist in Ukraine.
Yes, of course. And what I said exactly, because I just stood up at the very beginning and I just started speaking directly to the panel. This panel consisted of Minister of Energy, Environment of Russia, of Special Climate Envoy of Russia, and also some business and academia, and there were a lot of their representatives, and I believe also Gazprom and Rosneft, Rosatom representatives sitting and just taking happy photos before the event started. And myself, with other activists, have been sitting as well and watching them and thinking, how dare you to come here in the heart of climate talks while you are destroying our climate and while you are destroying my country and other countries, and while with your outrageous war, and you are destroying actually the freedoms and democracy all over the world while waging this war on climate with your fossil fuel reserves and fossil fueled war. And what I did, I stood up and I actually did what every Ukrainian dreamed about doing, that when they meet the same person in the same room. I just said them exactly as following. You are a terrorist state and you are genociding, torturing and killing us daily for 9 months. Your oil and gas is killing us.
You can listen and talk to Romanko on January 8th on Zoom. Go to rpm.world for the registration link. Continuing our coverage for the European Saudi Organization for Human Rights Conference, we'll be hearing from Zaki Sarraf from the British human rights group Reprieve.
So I'll speak about Saudi Arabia and how they've been using lies and deception to gaslight the international community with promises of reforms. So whilst at the same time of these lies, the kingdom's use of the death penalty continues to break international law without regard. And firstly, as just a preliminary point that's important to address, Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy. There are no democratically elected officials that can hold the rulers to account. Therefore, when we're talking about the kingdom's use of the death penalty and the constant disregard of international law, that responsibility rests squarely with the king and crown prince. They are responsible. So there have been remarks by supporters of the regime that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, is pushing for reforms, but there are these hardline judiciary members that are impeding the progress, and they are responsible in some way for the extreme repression in the country. So this is simply false. If Mohammed bin Salman was serious about reforms, there would be real reforms. So in an interview to the Time magazine in 2018, Mohammed bin Salman made a commitment that Saudi Arabia was restricting their use of the death penalty, and in particular for non-lethal offenses. The next year, 2019, Saudi Arabia executed a record high of 187 individuals, including a mass execution of 37 men. And just this year, on the 3rd of March, 2022, Mohammed bin Salman gave an interview to the Atlantic where he said, regarding the death penalty, we're getting rid of it in its entirety. And he goes on to say that the only two places where the death penalty will still be permissible would be in the places where it's stipulated in the Quran. So cases of murder, or when, quote, someone threatens the lives of many people. And only 9 days later, Saudi Arabia carried out the largest mass execution in its history, executing 81 men in one day. And so over 50% of those executed were executed for their participation in pro-democracy protests, and over 70% were executed for non-lethal offenses. So when we're looking at the reforms, and then we see what is being said and the reality, it's very clear that these are two completely different things. And it shows that when Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi state repeatedly make these promises of reform and change, they can't be trusted. And the death penalty for child defendants is no different. It follows the same pattern of promise and then deceit and executions. So the juvenile law was announced in 2018, and the Saudi authorities announced that these reforms would abolish the use of the death penalty for child defendants. And Article 16 of the juvenile law, if you were to look at it, it includes a caveat which says that the death penalty may still be used for child defendants for certain categories of offenses. And then in 2020, the royal decree was announced. And it was said that it will expand the scope of the juvenile law. But the full text of the royal decree was never published. The following year, Awad al-Awad, the head of the Saudi Human Rights Commission, addressed the UN Human Rights Council with the clear, categorical commitment that Saudi Arabia have abolished the use of the death penalty for child defendants without any caveats. This turned out to be a lie, because of the same year, Mustafa al-Darwish was executed in June of 2021 for protest-related offenses when he was a child. And there are still child defendants at risk of execution now. But due to the lack of transparency in Saudi Arabia, there's no way to truly know how many individuals are at risk of execution, unfortunately. But one of those at risk is Abdullah al-Huwaiti, who was only 14 years old when he was taken from his family home, tortured into confessing to a crime he could not have committed, and he was sentenced to death. And so now moving on, the pattern of broken promises is also evident when examining the death penalty for drug offenses. So in January last year, 2021, the Saudi Human Rights Commission announced in a tweet that the death penalty moratorium was in place for individuals convicted of drug offenses. And for a while, there were no executions for drug offenses, but there was no attempt by the kingdom to legalize the moratorium in any way. But this all changed a few weeks ago. And since the 10th of November of this year, Saudi Arabia has executed 20 individuals for drug offenses. So there was no announcement or justification for the authorities' U-turn. And worryingly, none of the 20 that were executed were known to civil society organizations that monitor the death penalty in Saudi Arabia, which means they were arrested, tried, sentenced, and executed in secrecy. So our client, Hassan Abu Khair, a Jordanian national, has a finalized death sentence and is at risk of imminent execution for alleged drug smuggling. He was tortured for 12 days at the time of his arrest. He never had a lawyer throughout the entirety of his proceedings. And Hassan was recently informed that he'll be moved to a death cell, which means that his execution could happen at any time without warning. So as much as the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, likes to talk about reforms and change, we must focus on the reality. The Saudi PR machine will whitewash their grave abuses with Formula One and golf events, or through the purchase of football clubs like Newcastle United. But we know this whitewashing is to distract from the reality, and the PR machine continues to lie because they simply cannot defend the indefensible. As there are promises that Saudi Arabia is becoming more tolerant, individuals who exercise their freedom of expression such as Salman al-Auda and Hassan al-Maliki, are at risk of the death penalty, as there are promises that the death penalty for child defendants has been abolished. Child defendants such as Abdullah al-Huwaiti are at risk of execution. And finally, despite their promise of death penalty moratorium for drug offences, Hussein Abu Khair could be executed at any time without any warning. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Or we shall hear one of the victims' stories where Dr. Ahmed Mazyat shall speak about the disappearance of his father, the Lebanese engineer Ali Mazyat, in Saudi Arabia since 1 year and 4 months without any communication with his parents. You have the platform, Doctor.
So I was saying, first of all, I just want to make sure that it is clear that I'm neither politically affiliated to any political party nor any religious party, nor is it of my concern to discuss the political aspect of the Saudi government or whatsoever. Majorly what happened with us it all started on August 4th, 2020. I had the last contact with my father at around 12 noon. Then like 2-3 hours later, we couldn't get back to him. 24 hours later, I tried contacting some of his friends to check up on him. I thought it was a medical issue or something. After discussing the case with his neighbors, they have informed us after checking the footage of the cameras that around 6 or 7 men wearing civilian clothes showed up to his apartment at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was taken with no prior notice, nor did they inform anyone about the matter. And ever since that time, we still have no contact whatsoever with him. Up till now, I have tried contacting the Saudi embassy in Lebanon. We have contacted the police in Saudi Arabia. We have contacted the Lebanese embassy in Riyadh. We have contacted the Lebanese government, the president, the parliament, some of the parliament members, and still we have failed to reach any agreement with anyone. We still haven't got any connection with my father. Up till now, it has been around 1 year and 5 months. We as a family have no single idea whether my father is still alive or not. We don't even know his whereabouts. We don't know why he's been taken. I don't know. The only thing we have received, the only official information we have received was that he was taken by the state security forces, or what they call Jihaz Amn al-Dawli. So I don't know. My father, by the way, has been living in Saudi Arabia since 2003 or 4. It has been around 18 years or 20 years. He's been working there as an engineer. None of his friends, because it's obviously no one can interfere. We've tried contacting the Interpol. We have tried contacting the Saudi government or the police, the the Lebanese officials, and we still haven't reached any information regarding his whereabouts, nor we could get in contact with him. Up till now, I don't know how an engineer who has been working there for around 20 years, who never had any single problem, not with the state, not with the government, not with any of his colleagues or neighbors. I don't know how would someone like that, a 55-year-old guy, be a threat to the national security. We have no idea why, and till when will he be held as a hostage, if we could call it so. After trying to contact all of the officials we could reach, I don't know if there's anyone else we could contact. We contacted the associations of human rights. We have contacted Amnesty. Amnesty has also made a press release, but still no response. We have contacted some organizations in Geneva, but also it was all in vain. The Saudi government is not responsive, nor is willing to respond to any of the questions we are posing. So this is my main question here. And once again, because I know how the situation is in the Gulf area generally, and in Saudi Arabia in particular, for the Lebanese citizens have been suffering of such actions of the Saudi government. Many of them, a lot of them, have been held in captive without any accusation, and for a long period of time.
Imagine a state that treats people like that. After 18 months, no trial, no access to lawyers, no contact with a family. Saudi-occupied Arabia, dear ally to the government of the United States. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.